Hello. I would like to be the Martin Luther to James's high clergy this morning. In 2005, the American author Saul Bellow, I think, perfectly summed up our information landscape when he wrote a collection of essays titled "There is Simply Too Much to Think About." I'm sure many of you find that relatable. Objectively, it had never been more true. In 2001, 4 years prior, university researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, had set out to figure out in data bits exactly how much information had been produced that year. They found that more information had been generated than in all of previous human existence. In fact, it was double that number. The following year, in 2002, it was double that number again and has since been growing exponentially. Over the past quarter century, the number of internet users has increased tenfold, now numbering 6 billion people. One way to understand the effects of this information tsunami is to consider the laws of supply and demand. The author Martin Gurri, in his book Revolt of the Elites, noted that as Wait, okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Feel like we're in a submarine there. That as the sources of information increased, the sort of perceived quality of those sources decreased. And coinciding with this online revolution, the traditional sources of authority, media, government, and academia, were undergoing a transition of their own. Excuse me. It is now well documented that in the years after the so-called Great Awakening in 2013, and probably many decades before, that they became, on the whole, more preachy, more censorious, less tolerant of dissenting views. This coincidence meant the authorities became more dogmatic, just as the opportunities for skepticism became functionally infinite. The institutions themselves were degraded, moving away from objectivity and meritocracy and towards dogmas around race and gender in particular. While the barriers to compete with them, to offer counterpoints, and to mock their sacred cows dropped to near zero. Now, has this been a good thing? I would argue yes. I agree with James that if you were to pick a New York Times article and pluck out at random a Joe Rogan episode, you would likely find that the New York Times article is more rigorously sourced and more factual. But I don't think we should or can choose one or the other. The first point to make is a practical one. After the invention of the Gutenberg printing press, it set in motion a cascade of events, including the Reformation, the wars of religion, the founding of the modern state, the Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution, and so on. None of the former hierarchies, from the Catholic Church to the Russian Tsars, could put the genie back in the bottle. They could only play whack-a-mole. And that's the situation I think we're in. Second, if it were possible for the old authorities to censor social media or provide some kind of informational bottleneck through which they can be the trusted commissars of truth, I think that might temporarily earn them back some power, but not authority, in the sense of rebuilding the trust of those who understandably have become skeptical of them. I think this approach also lacks epistemic humility. It presumes we know or are able to know in advance which words will be apt or correct in a given situation. No man or machine has that level of omniscience, and we should be very skeptical of those who claim to have it, and those who would elect themselves to be censors. Those advocating for this would ideally point to whom they would entrust with the responsibility to decide for the rest of us what we may read, see, or hear. Should we look to the British state, which arrests Irish comedy writers and up to 30 people per day in this country for online remarks that some people might find offensive or anxiety-inducing? Or perhaps their European counterparts, who seem to believe that misinformation is whatever they say it is. Or maybe a young tech worker in Silicon Valley who has likely been recruited from one of the most anxious and authoritarian generations America has ever produced. Pick your poison. The power to censor others is like Tolkien's ring. Few who wield it have made it out uncorrupted. The free online environment also allows us to gauge exactly how free we actually are. When the comedy writer Graham Linehan was arrested by 5 armed policemen for making a joke about a transgender in a women's bathroom, a newspaper likely wouldn't have run it. It was, by some accounts, quite distasteful. But the fact that he was able to self-publish tells us that that is the response of the British state. That is how free we are. Anyway, lastly, our old liberal hierarchies and their broadly liberal vision have led us into one disaster after another, from foreign misadventures to declining birth rates to demographic change, which has been imposed on European peoples from on high. And their hold on the organs of information production have only emboldened them to go further than they might otherwise have gone. Thank you.